For here's what it means to be king, to be first in every desperate attack and last in every desperate retreat. And when there's hard times in the land, as must be now and then, to wear finer clothes and laugh louder over a scantier meal than any man in your land.
Is a woman who is submissive to a man putting herself in a humiliating position? Sophie writes to us and says that she was watching an interview of a random couple in the street about their relationship. At one point, the man said that he believed men should pay for dates because the man was the leader in the relationship and his girlfriend was nodding along in agreement. Sophie finds all of this extremely objectionable. Why, she asks, should I become a secondary character in the story for a cheap meal and a little bit of money? It's easier to just get a job and pay your own bills. At least you know that your job will end after a set number of hours, and you are more appreciated as well.
Yeah, I think the interesting question here is it's easy to say that, and fair enough. But if she went on a date with a man who wanted to split the bill, would there be a second date? If the relationship progressed and he is the type of man to want to split things, who does not display, and by the way, the paying for the first date, many people I think misunderstand this, paying on the first date is very much the peacock's tail. It is a demonstration of I have enough resources to waste money. I have enough resources to take the risk that there will not be a second date and I've lost this investment. And it's a demonstration of a willingness to be generous, as I have these resources and I am willing to be generous with them to you. That demonstration is a deep signal on who this person is in a relationship, and it is not trivial. Now, you find a man who wants to split the bill with you on the first date, that relationship is going to be very different. He is not going to be that type of person. Who will he be when she gets pregnant? Will he say, hey, I could adopt. I don't need you to be pregnant. You need to get back to work and contribute your half economically to this relationship, right? Is that who she wants to be with? Similarly, will there be an attraction, a romantic or erotic spark in such a relationship? Or is she going to end up in a sexless marriage where she's reading romance novels of masculine main characters ripping the bodice of the female character and taking her, and a man who really takes control in the bedroom? I suspect that these things go together in a way that she's not quite understanding, because the signaling is very deeply rooted in our biology and in our culture.
I also find the term she used here, why should I become a secondary character in the story for a cheap meal and a little bit of money? And it's odd how she defines the secondary nature of her position in a relationship based on who it is that's paying the money for the meal. I've gone on many dates and many first dates, and I've paid for the meal, and I've never thought of it as like, oh God, I'm spending all this money and I hope she appreciates it. It's like you said, it's very symbolic of just your identity, that, well, this is just what I do. And I consider myself a masculine man. And in that context, it just is natural to me to go ahead and spend the money. But I don't think of it as like, because I'm spending the money, I am the primary character in this date and you become now the secondary character in the date. That's just not how I view it. And yet this is how she's internalized the gesture of, well, if the man is paying the money in the date, and that somehow creates immediately some kind of a hierarchy where this person is superior to the other person.
There is a statement of hierarchy. There's a statement of, hey, I am gesturing my willingness, my interest, my desire in enfolding you within my domain, within the domain of my life that I have carved out through my own work. That's the king archetype, and I'm willing to bring you in and to be the queen. Hey all, this is Athos. If you're enjoying this content and you'd like to see more, please be sure to spank that subscribe button. It's been very naughty. And if you'd like to have your question answered on the show, please feel free to ask us by email at deeperkink@gmail.com or click the link in the description below to complete the form. Now, back to the show. That's the king archetype, and I'm willing to bring you in and to be the queen. But yes, I'm asserting a hierarchy. I am. That's true. But
you can be the king, right, in the sort of archetypical sense. I think when she's using the term secondary character, I think she is implying an inferiority. I think that's what she's trying to imply, that, well, if you're paying and then you're saying that I'm lesser than because you've paid, and therefore I come after you in some sort of a fundamental existential sense. I'm lesser than you simply because you paid for the meal. I think that's what she's objecting to.
That's the huge conflation I think we have in our society. Because yes, he is saying that in the sense of power, not in the sense of importance. The notion that you can give power to someone and say, hey, I am submitting to your authority, but I am equally important to you as a human being. My needs are as important as yours. Right? That we have tied those things overly tightly in our society to say, well, if you agree to be lesser in power, you are agreeing also that you are lesser in importance. And that's simply not the case. Then we see this actually, I think, this error socially, even in such things as the frankly abysmal ways, in my opinion, that employers are starting to treat employees. The employer-employee agreement used to be this notion of, hey, you're an employee, you're doing a lot of work for me, I, the owner of the company, am going to take care of you. There will be opportunities for advancement. There's going to be a pension. We're going to take care of you in your old age. There's going to be a system of loyalty there, even in an employer-employee relationship. That's all gone now, because now it's just about power. Is that, well, you're agreeing to be the employee. If you actually wanted to be important, you should have been an entrepreneur. Only leaders are important.
Right.
Well, wait a minute. Only leaders are important? How you're going to end up all with companies of one? That's our economic plan, is to everybody have their own business? Like, that's an insane view. Not everybody wants to be the leader. Even in this question, she's not going out to be an entrepreneur. She's working an 8-hour shift for someone else. She is submitting to her boss's authority. And he is paying her bills in some sense, whoever started the company she's working for. Now, we don't necessarily see it that way, but she could be an entrepreneur. We have a huge culture of entrepreneurship, but she doesn't want to be the leader. She doesn't want to take on the stresses and the hassles and the challenges that all come with starting your own business. And as a result, she is taking a subordinate role in her workplace. And yet she doesn't feel that same humiliation. She doesn't feel that she's devalued. She feels empowered by taking that role. And in an ideal company that maybe is directed towards something that's meaningful, maybe let's say she's an environmentalist and it's an environmental company, but if she really feels, then she feels she's contributing to something of value. That her employment there is more than just the paycheck. It's a place of belonging. It's a place where her willingness to follow the leadership is predicated on the leadership's goodwill and good intentions and good direction, and it's no different in a relationship. If she is in a supporting character with her partner, her husband, and he is leading their relationship in a positive direction, then there's value in that support. He needs the support, right? And she is a deeply valued member of that team. Now, she's not the leader of that team, but it's not only the leader that is valuable. And for a submissive woman, of which there are many, her needs are better met in that subordinate role, just as her needs are better met as an employee than as a business owner. And I think that is a logical chain that people don't quite follow. I think the other thing that's, I think, very, very felt by men in a way that is not always well articulated is it is troubling to see your partner more submissive to her boss than to you in relationship, and willing to act and behave in ways that indicate a level of submission to his authority, but not to yours. And I think that shows that the value of that company is higher than the value of your partner. And that's maybe not a message that women would want to communicate if they realized that that's what they were doing.
Sometimes language gets tripped up a little bit here, where we talk about what it means to be a leader in a relationship. And I think a lot of people, when they hear that term, they think about it as, well, what we're saying here is that one person is superior in an existential sense. Their lives are somehow more important than the life of the person who is not in a leadership role. And I think it's baked into that idea of what it means to be a leader in a relationship. I think perhaps when women express, as this Sophie here is expressing, an angst when it comes to what she refers to as being a secondary character, and I think what she's implying there is like, well, I will be lesser than in a sort of an existential sense. My life will not be as valuable. My wishes and my needs will not be as important as the needs of the person in a leadership position. I think all of that is angst that kind of has come up in the feminist movement in reaction to what was real misogyny in many cultures, and still exists in many cultures today, where you do have this hierarchy between men and women, where men do hold a lot of power and then become quite tyrannical with that power vis-a-vis women. I think that is real, but I think the pendulum then gets swung too much the other way. And when they think about, well, how do we fix that kind of misogynistic structure, the solution they come to is like, well, it should all be equal. There should be no hierarchy at all, because if there's no hierarchy, then you can't have one partner dominating another partner, and that just doesn't work. This hierarchy has always existed. There's never, I can't really think of any large society that has been largely maternalistic in power structures, where all the women had the power and it was the men that were submissive. It just, there may be, but by and large, the vast majority of tribes and civilizations and societies have organized themselves around a masculine sort of power structure. So there's a biological rooting, I think, to that power structure. And to just deny it and say, well, we're modern people now and we don't have to like follow our biology, you're playing with fire there, because you're going against biology to some extent, biological imperatives.
Again, I think, I always like to kind of elucidate that when we talk about these things, we're talking about archetypes, not stereotypes. And those are different. Is that if you pick strongest person in a room of 1,000, it will be a man. And thus, the archetype of physical strength is masculine. But that doesn't mean that there aren't physically strong women. And especially in today's era of veganism and yoga, there are many women who are physically stronger than many men. And so even though the archetype is still masculine, hearkening back to the notion of that the strongest man or strongest person in 1,000, the stereotype is incorrect, because not all men are stronger than all women. That is also a false statement. And so the archetype can resonate with something true biologically, even if it is not true as a stereotype. So it's important to not conflate those two. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think that I would nuance your commentary about power structures a little bit and talk about different forms of power. So I think even in very traditional, like you go back to the Dark Ages in Europe, like Middle Ages in Europe, and it's a very overtly masculine power structure in some ways, but the women wielded quite a lot of power through the power of even something like gossip. There's a subversive social thing there that, you don't want to be the man whose woman is spreading bad word about him in the village. She is doing often group work with other women. So the opportunity to spread good or bad word is there. Women did often band together in trying to get their men to act in certain ways by group effort in those ways. So it's a different form of power. And that goes along with this, is that women often want a man who is powerful enough to exert influence by himself, and men often want a woman who is socially adept enough to exert influence through flirtation, through positive manipulation. And I don't think manipulation is always a negative term. So they're just different forms of power, I would say, and that hinges on so many of these biological things, as you pointed out. So I think that's the tie-in, is that, yes, men are physically stronger, and so on a one-on-one basis, the power yields to the stronger. But in a social species, it's not one-on-one. That's not the framework. I love Ursula K. Le Guin's, now I'm going to just devolve into quotes here for a second, but one of Ursula K. Le Guin's comments in The Dispossessed is, one of the persons is saying, yes, it's the survival of the fittest. And her character goes, yes, and in a social species, the fittest is the most social, is the most ethical. That is the definition of fitness in a social species. Such a great turn on its head. Going along with that, one of my favorite books as a child was C.S. Lewis in The Chronicles of Narnia. And in one of those books, there's a scene in which a young boy ends up being found. Turns out he's the elder brother of the prince. but was lost as a child or whatever, and comes back and turns out, well, he's the elder by a few minutes. They're twins, and he's going to end up being king. So the prince no longer is the crown prince, so to speak. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know I was going to take your crown from you and all this. And his brother is like, yay, I can always be a prince. I won't have to be king. It's princes that have all the fun, is what he says. And the king is talking to them both and turns to the elder and says, that's truer than even your brother knows. For here's what it means to be king. To be first in every desperate attack and last in every desperate retreat. And when there's hard times in the land, as must be now and then, to wear finer clothes and laugh louder over a scantier meal than any man in your land. And that vision of leadership, of what it means to be king, is something we've totally lost. Is the notion that that leadership is to take on the risk for other people. Is I'm going to stand in the position, and we know this. We see this in anything we call heroic. Anytime we say, we saw this during the pandemic, is the nurses are heroes, and the part of us that meant that, and there was part of us that meant that, even if we, of course, knew that the corporations were going to betray it shortly after. So we were a bit cynical about it, I think, even at the time. But the part of us that meant that was the part of us that saw them taking on risk for us and saying, okay, hey, I'm going to take the risk so that you're okay. And I think that's leadership. That's the core of the notion of leadership. But we've lost that. Now we just see leadership as an opportunity to extract value exploitatively from other people's work, from other people's effort. And that's our view of leadership. And I think that's a pretty tragic shift culturally.